In 1971, Professor Phil Zimbardo conducted a now infamous study known as the Stanford prison experiment, the goal of which was to show that normal people could behave in pathological ways. The study was somewhat simple. Zimbardo selected a group of men from the San Francisco area, assigned them to the role of either a prisoner or a guard, and kept them all in a Stanford basement that simulated a prison. The results, as originally displayed, were apparently horrifying. The guards lost all sense of morality and emotionally and physically abused the inmates until the point where the study had to be discontinued just 6 days in. The study became widely cited in the late 20th century by those who wished to show that the role of a prison guard caused seemingly normal men to become devoid of all compassion, becoming evil rulers to maintain order in their pseudo-society. However, 50 years later, and even Professor Zimbardo admits that the results of this study were far from accurate. There are many flaws associated with the Stanford prison experiment, the most important of which was that a few guards acted dramatically because they felt that they had a part to play in Zimbardo's experiment. They acted and believed that they were evil for 6 days because, well, that was the expectation. Those who strongly believe in the study sometimes cite that when given the power or the opportunity to be evil, humans will always take it. But the experiment has low validity. In short, it wasn't really an experiment, it was just a performance. Leaders often feel that they have to put on the same show. They must be tough, to show no fear, as Machiavelli suggests in The Prince, urging leaders to forget any sense of compassion lest they may be seen as soft or weak. Can compassion bring a strong leader to their knees? Perhaps. They may swap reality with false optimism and really hurt people in the process. So how can a leader bridge this difference? How can they be strong while still being dedicated to helping those that they lead? The answer lies in empathy. The word has been around since the earlier 20th century, originating in 1909 as the German Einfühlung, which translates to feeling in. At first, Einfühlung was meant to portray feelings for animals and inanimate objects, but it later evolved into the more commonly used psychological term that we now use in the 21st century, empathy, that the Encyclopedia of Social Psychology defines as understanding another person's situation by imagining oneself in that situation, or more informally, putting yourself in another person's shoes. Psychologists have agreed on the existence of two main branches of the tree of empathy, cognitive and affective. While the latter is more commonly associated with those that are empathetic, the former is just as important and perhaps even easier to access. Cognitive empathy is the ability to recognize the thoughts and feelings of one another, while affective empathy is feeling personal distress as a result of this cognitive empathy. As you can see, cognitive and affective empathy are intertwined. One must feel cognitive empathy in order to feel affective empathy, although it is not necessary to feel affective empathy in order to feel cognitive empathy. Hence, a leader could potentially use their cognitive empathy, imagining the effects of a certain decision on a group of people, including those whom they do and don't lead. This type of empathy is specifically what I call socio-political empathy. Empathy used in a socio-political context by any person, but especially when used by someone who has the potential to change even one life with their empathetic capability. One example of a political leader who advances the perspective of empathy today is Yesinda Ardern, the current Prime Minister of New Zealand. She is the youngest female Prime Minister the country has ever had, and joined the Labour Party when she was 17, becoming PM when she was 37 in 2017. Ardern is praised for being kind and empathetic, but this might make her seem weak to her counterparts. However, she stated in an interview for a book that because we've, or political leaders, placed over time so much emphasis on notions of assertiveness and strength that we probably have forgotten that you can't have other qualities of kindness and empathy. And yet, when you think of all the challenges we face in the world, that's probably the quality that we need the most. Ardern is not a perfect leader, and no one ever is. But she recognizes that empathy and strength are not mutually exclusive. In fact, a leader might actually derive strength from their ability to empathize with another person. However, some social psychologists have run studies that concluded that empathic concern, or more colloquially feeling bad for somebody, fuels political divide, especially in America. This is due to a phenomenon called selective empathy, which means exactly what its descriptor points out. We, whether consciously or unconsciously, choose who to use our empathetic capabilities for and when to use them. For example, if a friend gets a spot at a prestigious university that you wanted to go to, it might be almost natural to carry some resentment toward them. Multiply that sort of selective empathy to a larger scale, and you get the sort of incredibly divisive political climate that we live in today. However, a leader who chooses to use socio-political empathy would do so for everybody involved. Empathy is not grounded in a compassion of false optimism that I mentioned earlier. A leader would not become any weaker by considering the effects of a decision on any group of people. Socio-political empathy is also not limited to just leaders. Leader, team leader, professor, doctor, lawyer, anyone can use socio-political empathy. Although this type of empathy has the potential to help billions of people, change on a small scale is necessary to eventually include bigger groups of people. Consider the following scenario, one that could really happen in any classroom or workplace. A high school AP teacher has assigned her class 3 assignments for the week. The first, to read a chapter of a college-level textbook. The second, to take notes and turn those in. And the third, to write an essay using the principles of the chapter, all in the span of a week. That same week, one student may have the SAT or ACT, one may be drafting college applications, one may have a robotics or debate tournament, and many may have the extremely practical job of having to take care of younger siblings while their parents are away at work. One student voices this concern to their teacher. The teacher ponders. If other students likely have similar schedules, then it must be that everyone is feeling pretty overwhelmed by the work I have given them this week. I imagine how it's like to feel so overwhelmed, and I don't want to put this much pressure on my students. So I'll make the essay optional this week, and I'll give extensions to students who have extenuating circumstances. Every student in the class goes home that week, feeling more relieved than ever, because they just have one less assignment to do that week. But in the process, the teacher does not necessarily think, oh, woe to me, these kids' pain is my pain. I'm in such a personal struggle after hearing this, because that type of thinking is counterproductive and would likely waste her time as well as the time of every one of her students. Rather, she utilized her cognitive empathy to realize that her assignments might be a bit overwhelming, and she made the essay optional. But perhaps you might be thinking, oh, but there's a logistical concern. Teachers need to assign tests, Teachers need to give their students some form of assessment. But maybe the next week she decides to make their only pressing assignment that essay. That way the students can have more time and they can turn in better quality work. Thus, the teacher's needs are met and the students' desires are fulfilled. No trade-off was made in the process, and yet everyone's minds were unburdened by this. Empathy is not an easy thing. As a society, we have put up a boundary between our personal emotions and our professional lives. But we must bend these rules, we must bend these boundaries and perhaps even break them, because empathy is a way to determine the well-being of the people, and the well-being of the people is the foundation of any socio-political job. And so, although this choice is a difficult one, you must make it, because it is necessary in order to continue progressing our society. Thank you.